Hey guys, welcome to our last set of videos that's going to focus on arrays and this idea of what we call control structures, looping, sequence, and selection. In this video, I want to just focus on arrays. An array is basically a data structure where we can hold a list of items. So for instance, a grocery list. And later in this video, we're going to code out a list, and I'll show you how to process and iterate through that list and attach it to an HTML document or output it with an HTML document. So we're going to focus on this first bullet point here in this video, and then in the corresponding videos, we'll focus on flow control. All right, so arrays. What is an array? That's the question. Again, it's just nothing but a list. You can put them into two categories. There's something what we call static arrays, and there's something called dynamic arrays. Not to confuse you with the language of array, but really you can kind of think of it as a list. As if you were going to the grocery store, you would get a sheet of paper, you would probably put grocery list at the top of that sheet, and then you would put your items that you're going to get from the grocery store. I want to use a coding playground, and I'll just show you the syntax of an array, and we'll talk about the various terms that you would use when you're identifying certain parts of the array. So we'll say var, we just say grocery list. And then here is the syntax. We have to have a open bracket and a closing bracket. And then we always end each statement with a semicolon. In this case here, I'm going to do 3 grocery items. I'm going to do oranges, I'm going to do bread, and I'm going to do eggs. So here's my list. My list contains 3 items. And with the normal variable, right, we just hold one value. So we can say var, I can say grocery store name. And we can say something such as target, right? So this would be just a variable that would hold one value, but an array holds multiple values. Within JavaScript, this is permissible. And so here we see that we have all string items within our array. So oranges, bread, and eggs. We know that it's string because of the double quotation marks. But in JavaScript, we can do this. We could put and mix various data types. And so if we wanted to do 27 here, that would be permissible. Now, I'm not going to do that, but I just wanted to show you that you could have different data types held within your list. I'm going to undo that, right? So this is the basic structure of our array, the syntax. You give it a name, and then you give the various items, but you have to use the syntax open and close bracket. Let's jump back to our PowerPoint and just talk about a little bit about the definitions within an array. All right, I had to make a quick correction. I had to change some of the definitions here from some of the things we're carrying over from our previous slide here. Anyway, here's some of the different terms that you would find that someone would use with an array. Index, element value, array literal, and then array object. Now, let me just put this into context by actually going back to our example. So here's the definition of our array. We defined it that it's going to be the name of a grocery list. And so in this case here, like I said, we can have multiple data types represented within our array. And so here in our array, we have 3 items. When you look at the index of an array, right, we can go back here and we can actually tug at each of these items within our array by giving it a particular index. We can say grocery list. We could say index, right? So here what I'm going to put in between the open and closing bracket, and I'll put a semicolon so you can see the brackets. I'm going to put the index. So if I put 1 here, what would it give me? I can just do a console.log here. If I were to output this here, this would give me bread because the index starts at position 0, right? This would be position 1, this is position 2. So if I run this with JavaScript, you'll see in the console here, whoops, may have spelled console wrong, console, let's clear that, and then let's run it again, right? We get bread, right? If I put position 0, you'll see that we get orange. So that's the index within the array, right? And here, the element or value is actually the value that's being stored within the position of the array. So you may say, what is the difference between element and value? Essentially, it's the index. Well, what's the difference between index and value? The index is actually the value that you can put into the subscript, and the value is actually what's being stored in that particular position. So oranges would be the value, but the position or the index would be it's in position 0. A few more things in terms of terminology here. Array literal is what you see in here in this example. This is where we we gave it a name, and we just outright gave it the values of the array. And that would be considered what we call an array literal, right? Where we literally just basically declare the values for this array. Now the other one here is what we call an array object. An array object, I'll show you the difference here, is that instead of doing an array literal, this is just basically all this is a different way of declaring array. And we could say, instead of doing that, we could say we gave it a name, right? We defined it. We can say new. We call the object new instance, new array instance, and here we can just go ahead and pass in these values. And this would work just the same as what you see on line number 2. There's just 2 different ways of declaring an array. So this one is an array literal, and this one is called what we call an array object. Syntax. There's a few things here. Moving on. So here's kind of an example of we declared an array of how to make a sweet potato pie and some of the different ingredients. We can iterate or we call loop through the array, where we're going to talk about control structures in our next video. This is just a way of basically iterating through the various items or the various values that are stored within this array. And so this for each method is coming from this array object. This is one of the objects that I would encourage you to study. So the name of the object is array, and there's some properties and there's some methods. And these next 2 slides is just getting at some of the different methods and the different types of properties you can use with the array object. And so there's one called for each, right? And that's the one that's being used here. This next slide has a series of them where you can have one called map, where you can map the various items within the array. Then you can use what we call an arrow function to essentially just, in this case, we can just output each of the items that are within our array, and we can map it to a certain destination. There's filter, there's reduce, and one of the things I would encourage you to do is to play around with some of these different helper methods. And the best way to do that is to go to W3 Schools, and you can click on filter, and it'll give you an example. And you just kind of use some of those various methods to see how it would alter or change or give you some certain information from the array if you use that particular method. Like I said, I want to keep this video pretty short, but that's just a quick video that kind of just introduces us to arrays. And essentially the takeaway here is that an array is just a data type where we can store values, a list of values. And then I wanted to show you the syntax of that. And last but not least, I'll just go ahead and do an example of how to iterate through an array, right? So here's an example where we're iterating through the sweet potato pie, right? And we use the for each. Let's go ahead and iterate through our grocery list. So we go back to JS bin. Let's go ahead and get rid of the array object here. I'm going to get rid of this here. And what I'll do here is to say grocery list dot, and I'll just use a for each. And then I'm going to use, this is called an arrow function here. For each item within an array, I'm going to use this index position here. I'll just do a console.log grocery list X. Let me make sure I got my syntax right. Yeah, that's correct. There we go. Sorry about that. So here, what it's going to do is basically iterate through each item and then output each of the items within my grocery list here. So if I run this here, yeah, that's correct. Console.log, yeah. Sometimes these coding playgrounds can throw me off here. But if I run this here, right, there's the oranges, bread, eggs. So let me clear that again, and then I'll just quickly run it. There we go. Sometimes I code in so many different languages between Java, C#, and Node.js and JavaScript. And so I have to remember the syntax myself there. Anyway, quick example in terms of how to process through this list. We could also do a for loop or a while loop, and we'll talk about what a for loop and a while loop is a little bit later. But this is how I would process and iterate and output each of the items within a list. All right, I'm going to put a pause to this video. And in the next video, we're going to talk about something called control structures. And we're going to jump back to this example here. And we're going to actually do some practice with implementing an array and then also making a decision, structuring out a decision structure within our code to make a decision on whether it's going to be a full-time student or a part-time student. So stay tuned.